Someone recently asked me if there was a person in my life that I considered a role model, and I didn't have to think twice about it. That would be my father. Now, he's been gone 20 years. I still miss him, and still look back and say, yeah, he was my role model. He taught me a respect for unions, the benefits that were gained, the protection for employees, but more importantly, he taught me the importance of a strong, positive work ethic. He always had projects going on, and he always completed his projects, but he wasn't one to sit still. My parents bought their first house when I was 11 years old. Small house, so one of the first things my dad did was remove some walls to make a more open feel to the place. Built a rec room in the basement. After a couple of years, we built a bedroom in the basement, a larger room than I would have, gave me more room and privacy, so that was really good. And did a good job too. He did most of his own work on his cars. In fact, at one point, he helped me switch out a transmission on a car. Now in that basement, he also had a workbench in an area that he would tinker, and he was into Citizens Band radio, CB radio. This is back in the 60s. So he liked to tweak his radios. There were many times where he'd be on the roof tuning in his antennas. And in fact, one of his antennas was a tower. I can still remember, we dug a hole big enough to put a couple of yards of concrete in for the base of that antenna tower. And he put a pivot base on it. And it was 30, 40 feet high, whatever zoning would allow. As a kid, all I know was it was tall. And we raised and lowered it with a cable. What he did was he took a piece of angle iron, heavy steel, had a pulley welded on it so he could set it on the roof anytime he wanted to raise and lower that tower. Ran a steel cable across the roof to the tower, to the front of the house, and raised and lowered it with his 64 Oldsmobile. I can still remember it. It was pretty impressive. It was a big beam antenna, that sort of thing you might think of as a ham antenna. It would rotate, big tall thing with long spikes. He also had a planar antenna at the end of the roof. That was his first antenna, I remember that. But yeah, that was pretty cool. We dug a trench at the back of the house as a footer for a patio. He was misinformed by the building inspector that he needed it for a footer for the patio. But it worked out. I mean, we put the concrete in ourselves, but it worked out because it ended up being a footer for an addition anyway. We started camping when I was 61, so I was 8 years old. And we were tent camping down in Smoky Mountains, Blue Ridge, Pennsylvania, New York State. You know, we were living in Buffalo area. And after a couple of years, my father built a trailer. He took the rear axle of a truck and part of the frame and built a plywood box to go on it. It was open in this. It was as wide, 6 to 8 feet wide, whatever it was, 6 feet wide, with an open space in the center, and then 18-inch boxes running the length on both sides. And he had drop doors that were changed, so they would drop down and be a surface. It was a camp kitchen plus all the tent and everything went inside there before he moved on to bigger trailers. Yeah, he had his projects. And he had that work ethic. When he started something, he finished it. Now, when I was in high school and college, I was working at a department store. I started out bagging and pushing shopping carts. There was also a grocery store. And I ended up working in a department. I was in electrical and hardware and electrical, and then after that plumbing. And it's pretty funny if you think about it. Here's an 18, 19-year-old kid telling grown men what they're supposed to do, giving them advice on fixing their plumbing, their plumbing repairs. But it was things that I learned from my dad. Worked on his own cars. I think I told you this. He helped me. Yeah, I did. Helped me switch out a transmission when I was 19. I still think about that. Well, if I didn't, I told you now. Well, anyway, back to that department store. I was going to college, and I dropped out after 2 years. Yeah, what can I say? Well, I was still living at home, and my dad said, "Hey, if you have coffee, drink it." No, he didn't say that. He said, "If you're going to continue living here, you need to get yourself a full-time job." Well, of course. I had a friend who, during college, he was working summers at a furniture factory. And he got me a job there. I ended up working there full-time. I worked there for a couple of years. It was not a really good paying job, but I worked with some people who did some good work. They were skilled. They were proud of their job, but they were not well paid. They like to brag how they were making more money than GM employees in the area back in the early 60s. But at this point in 73, they weren't, making half of what the GM workers were making. There was a millionaire owner-employer who was taking advantage of them. Well, I ended up getting a second job. So I worked 2 jobs, and between the 2 of them, I was working 60, 70 hours sometimes. I worked on the loading dock at the same trucking company my dad did. And I worked a couple of years there part-time. Well, it was really beating the crap out of me all those hours, and so I stopped making myself available. Now I'm still living at home, and my dad says to me, Ken, they're going to be hiring, you can just see it, they're going to be hiring soon, full-time, and they like you better than so-and-so, but they're going to hire someone who's available. So I made myself available again, and I was working a lot of hours, and I got hired full-time. Now, while I'm working there, part-time and full-time, I was working beside my dad some of those times. And I got to see his work ethic. Now, he didn't so much come out and say it, but I could see from his attitude that when you're being paid to do a job, you give your employer their money's worth. You learn every aspect of the job, and you do it right. Now, there are going to be times when you're working next to someone who either won't do all the work or isn't able to do all the work. You can resent them to a point, but keep this in mind. As long as you're a reliable employee, well, your employer is going to rely on you, and they're going to recognize that. I see it that way to this day, even when I'm not working. Oh, retired, I might add. But yeah, I still see it that way. So, yes, my dad taught me well. It's important to have a strong, positive work ethic. Hey Dave, thanks for asking me about that. It gave me a reason to put more thought into that, and I haven't thought about that for a long time, so I really appreciate that. This has been VEDA. That's video every day in August 2014. Day 19. Ciao folks. Vlog on.